really happy that to be here about this, and this is our, I believe it's our 16th year. Is that right? 16th? That's right. Our goal is to be able to provide this tool to advocates, Congress, congressional staff, legislators, at sort of the federal and state level, advocates, that to help us ensure we remain accountable to kids and children receive their fair share of the federal budget. Today's program will take an important look at how our government has chosen to invest in our children, both domestically and internationally. We have an expert team of speakers here today that will share the incredible impact that federal funding has had on the well-being of kids, public support for such programs, and data that shows us that there is so much that we can achieve, so much more that we can achieve on behalf of our children and families. So I first want to thank some people. I want to thank Senator Whitehouse and his staff and the Senate Budget Committee for hosting us today. I would also like to thank some of the funders who made this all possible to do this work. So the Oak Foundation, Wellspring, GHR, the Packard Foundation, and Casey Foundation, Fisker Foundation have all been really instrumental in giving us the resources to actually conduct this work. It is not easy to go through the entire federal budget and pull out all the children's programs and figure out for each and every program. You'll be hearing from Chris, who's done a lot of this work, but our staff as well, to really think through like what is actually the share that go to kids for each program, and then pull it all together and figure out then what is that piece of funding compared to the overall federal share of the budget. And we do, like I said, we both do domestic and we do international. So, but I first want to really thank our special guest here today, which is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. I will just admit that I'm a huge fan of the Congresswoman, always have been, and if she appears on a podcast or a radio show, I'm watching because I learned something about her every time. She was actually born in El Paso. I was raised in El Paso. So I have that connection that I don't think I've shared with her before. But also, Congress, we have a Champions for Children program in First Focus. And with the exception of 1 year, Congresswoman Lee has always been a champion for children. And that 1 year was our first year, which probably meant that we didn't know what we were doing. So the second we kind of figured it out and knew what we were doing, she was always at the top of the list. In fact, if you think about Congress, there's 435 members. Congresswoman Lee was number one more than once on that list. And so, that's like, you have to be, you're beating 434 other people in terms of, and we do this complicated point system, but she's such a leader on so many issues. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I want to present her a Champion for Children Award for her just amazing service on behalf of the kids. This Congress, but also throughout her entire career. So Congresswoman Lee represents the California's 12th district. But I would say that she represents for children, all the children across this country and worldwide, in fact. Many of the achievements, the key achievements in recent years would not have been possible without the work of the Congresswoman. For example, in 2015 and 2016, First Focus Campaign for Children went to the offices of Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Roy Bauer, to talk about trying to secure funding in the National Academy of Sciences to do a study on child poverty. There's a feeling in the country that poverty is just intractable, it's so hard to address, and we didn't feel that was true, and Congresswoman didn't either, and it was such a priority. So we asked them let's get a study to show people what is the pathway to address and cut child poverty. So Congresswoman worked diligently, got secured bipartisan support, and got funding to have this study done. It was released in 2019. It was called the Roadmap to Reducing Child Poverty. And it has been essential to achieving the gains that we saw in 2021 around the child tax credit. Basically, that was the number one recommendation. But the important thing about that report is, like anything with respect to children, it showed the holistic story about all the things that need to that children need. Children, don't operate in silos. If you want to address their poverty, you also need to think about nutrition and health and education and childcare. Just the full array of things, and vice versa. Child poverty negatively impacts every aspect of the lives of kids. So fixing this issue would be enormous for kids. And so we did in 2021, and it was part of the American Rescue Plan Act, and it drastically reduced poverty. In fact, child poverty in 2021 reduced to 5.2%, the lowest level. Unfortunately, expired. The House did pass an extension with Congresswoman Lee's lead, and unfortunately, it did not. Was not included in the final package here in the Senate. But in 2022, we continue to build off that work with the study and collaborating with the Congresswoman's office. Congress also established the Children's Interagency Coordinating Council at HHS, and that was also due to the Congresswoman's lead. The CICC is one way to better improve government coordination of varied federal programs that serve children and their families. I just want to also point out that there's a million other things I could say about her on the domestic side, but let me say one thing about her amazing work on the international side. She's also been a long-term advocate to ensuring children worldwide receive their fair share of foreign assistance funding. It was her efforts that helped secure a 10% set-aside of PEPFAR funding that goes to orphans and vulnerable children. PEPFAR is a key program that works to ensure children have access to good nutrition and schooling, and has resulted in 5.5 million babies being born HIV-free and 57% of HIV-positive children having access to treatment. Again, every year, First Focus Campaign for Children names the top leaders for kids in Congress through our Champions for Children Award. It should be no surprise that due to the reasons that I've shared, many more, that Congresswoman Lee is once again a leading champion for children in Congress. And I'm pleased to present her with the award today, and thank her for work, and look forward to hearing from her. Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Because we're going to end child poverty. It's in this country, the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world. We shouldn't have one child going to sleep hungry. We shouldn't have one child living below the poverty line. So that's just a value that we hold dearly, and that you all are embracing and making sure that policymakers understand that children should be our priority. Today, what is it, 11 million children across the country, especially in Black and brown communities, disproportionately impacted, living in poverty. That's a shame and disgrace. And we all know that poverty just doesn't happen. It's a policy choice. And I'm very proud to say I work with Bishop Barker, the Poor People's Campaign, because the resolution calling for a third Reconstruction is important. Because and you all have to understand, we have the resources here in America. When you look at this military budget, approaching $1 trillion, with at least 150, 200 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. The Pentagon just flunked with 6 audits, the only agency in government that's never been audited until myself and a Republican forced legislation that they do that. And can you imagine what we could do with just say 200 billion investing in children? So take on that issue big time, because otherwise they're going to say, where are we going to get the money from? They're going to say addressing child poverty is going to create even more of a deficit. Those arguments are bogus arguments, because we have the investments, the money, the resources, the tax dollars to end child poverty in America. And so, yes, I've been on the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee, and I was really proud to work with Congresswoman Lucille Roybal Allard to establish the Interagency Task Force, and also the National Academy of Sciences efforts. And you all are the results of this. And so stay organized and keep this movement going, because this is a movement for our future. It's a movement to make sure that every child in America has the life that they so deserve, the quality of life that they so deserve, and that they have the future They so deserve it. Right now, children have not been a priority. It's been a focus, yes. It's always, okay, Barbara, well, whatever you want us to do, let us know. But we need to have more members of the House and Senate talking about children and talking about, I always say, using the P word, because when I came to Congress 26 years ago, it was like, okay, yes, we fight for the middle class each and every day, which we know, we have to grow the middle class, but no one would talk or use the P word, poverty. It was like, I have to keep getting up telling my Democratic colleagues, talk about poverty, talk about children, use the P word, poverty and peace, come on. So we have a lot of work to do, but you all have made such a difference already here. And so I just want to thank you so much for really lifting up children and being the voice of children both here in America and throughout the world. Thank you again, Congress.
Awesome aid, All right, thank you so much again, Congresswoman. So we have a full, robust schedule, and so I'd like to quickly turn to our other champion, and a huge champion in the Senate, which is Senator Whitehouse, and I would like to ask Josh Smith to present a few words, and just want to say that he's the policy director of the Senate Budget Committee, where he leads on the technical work on assessing bills that come to the Senate floor with spending implications. He plans committee hearings and acts as a main communicator from the committee to members. It is a tough job. I worked up here on the Hill, and always the Senate Budget Committee people I used to rely on all the time, because they talk a whole different language than everybody else in Congress. Today's event would not have been possible without Josh's support and work and that of the Senate Budget Committee. And so I just want to thank you so much, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
So thank you, Bruce, and thank you everybody for being here. Although going right after Congressman Lee is a tough task. I actually was our constituent for a while, so it's both an honor and sort of terrifying to go right after him. But I'm only going to take a couple minutes of your time, as Bruce said. I'm the policy director here on the Senate Budget Committee, working for Chairman Whitehouse. And what we're focusing on over the next 14 months is quite a rocky road in terms of fiscal and budget policy. When we'll have the opportunity to revisit the child tax credit and other investments in children. And I think this is tremendously important for everybody in this room, everybody. I'm not an expert actually in children, although I think everybody is, because we were all children, presumably. And also I have 2 kids myself, so this is incredibly important personally, even though this isn't my main focus. But I think that you're here at a really interesting time. Obviously, government funding is running out next Monday, a week from Monday. So that's the first can that Congress gets to kick. It's really interesting because obviously either decisions about full year funding will be made and they'll get done, or it'll be kicked into next year, and nobody at this point knows who's going to make those decisions. And I was looking it up, in 2012 was the last election that held the Senate, the House, and the White House, that none of the pre-flipped. Every election since then has had somebody flip. So I think that there's this constant idea in the House and Senate and the White House that we're about to take charge, and so there's a lot of hunting. Like let's hold off on a decision until we can make it. Who knows who's going to be able to make the decision? Last year, full year appropriations bills weren't signed until March. Obviously, the president will have his or her say. The president's budget is due the first Monday in February. Both times that a new president's taken office, their budget hasn't come out until late May, so I guess deadlines are meant to be broken. There's also obviously the possibility that either the Republicans or Democrats control all 3 House and Senate, the White House, in which case they'll have the chance to write a reconciliation bill or try to defeat one, depending on what side you're on. So that's a process that could presumably start right away in January when the new Congress takes office and sworn in. We also have to deal with the debt limit, which last time it came up, it resulted in funding caps, which impacted everything on the discretionary side of the budget. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. And then, really quite importantly, obviously, the the individual side of the Trump tax cuts expire December 31st of 2025. And that's really the deadline to figure out what happens with the child tax credit, which we're also focused on. Allowing the increase to expire is obviously going to be some idea of how we want that to play out. And I would hope that there is an opportunity for me personally, for my staff, or everybody up here to help write a fuller extension of the CTC like we saw after a while. So I'm happy to take a question or two, and then can ask your experts. I'm also just as happy to take 0 questions.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate, we really appreciate Senator Whitehouse and the staff's leadership on these issues, and I think as advocates for children, we're all always so appreciative that when people pay attention. Kids don't vote, they don't have PAC money, so many members don't really pay attention, and when members do, it's phenomenal. But I will also say, Kate's going to talk about how the public does care, so that's important as well. So I just want to get on with the agenda. We have a lot of awesome speakers. So I'm going to do just to tell you all kind of what we're going to be doing today, and then I'll just turn it over to them. So the first speaker we're going to have is my really good friend Anton Gunn. He's like, he's worked in the children's advocacy space for many years. I won't date either you or me there, but he's just been a really amazing friend of children for so many years. He worked in the White House for a number of years. He served in the South Carolina House Legislature, where his subcommittee assignments was medical affairs, children affairs, and social services. He also joined the Obama administration and served in the Department of Health and Human Services during the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. That was a thing, right? But he's always just been an amazing friend of kids, and he's now doing all kinds of other things in his new job, and he can talk about that. I have a very extensive bio on him, but I think we'd rather hear from him. Also then, following him will be Chris Becker, who works with me, and Chris is our awesome Vice President of Budget Policy and Data Analytics at First Focus, and he'll talk about sort of the findings of the report that are very important. And then that will be followed by Kate Gormley, who's like an awesome person at Lake Research Partners. I mean, I've just enjoyed a relationship with her over the years. And she will tell you about their findings in nationwide polling about the support levels for children in various programs. And just it's very critical that people understand that the American people is on the side of this. They really are, and Kate will talk about that. And then, let's see, and then last, but definitely not least, is my dear friend Daniela Ruggiero, and she is the CEO and president of Together for Girls. Again, I won't date Daniela and me, but she and I actually did work together here in the Senate for a period of time, and now we work together on the outside. And just a huge fan of her and the work that they do at Together for Girls, and she has an amazing history and background too, and just from everything from the UN Foundation and just State Department. I don't know. You've got like her resume is very impressive, and just has done so much work on kids at both here domestically but also internationally. So I will start first with Anton, and then look forward to all of our awesome speakers today.
Thank you so very much, Bruce. Thanks to First Focus, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for being here. So I want to give a little bit of context setting for who I am, why I'm standing here, and the most important things that I want you to take away from what I share today. First and foremost, Bruce laid out a lot of my titles. I'm a former state legislator in South Carolina. I was the first African American in history elected to my district. first Democrat in 24 years in the South Carolina House from my district, and was always a champion for kids. I only served one term and got plucked into the Obama administration on something that is incredibly passionate and personal to me, and that is healthcare and healthcare access. So those are two of my titles. But I have two other titles that I want to share that I think are most important for the context of this conversation. First is I'm a father. I'm not just a father, but I'm a girl dad, and it's really important to me. And my daughter is here with me today, and there she is right there. Her name is Ashley. She's sitting right there beside me. So I made Ashley a promise, and I make my wife a promise, that most of the time my wife never believes that I'm able to accomplish the promise that I made. So I need you to do me a favor and help me to keep my promise. So in order to keep my promise, I need you to do just one thing. Hold your hands up in the air like this. Okay? One person doesn't have them up. All right, everybody shake it real fast. Okay? So I promised them that I would shake hands with everybody in this room. Okay? So I just showed you a new public health way to shake hands with people and not pass COVID. So that's first, is that my daughter is important to me. The second title that I want to share with you is how I started my career, and that is a grassroots community organizer on children's issues. I've worked on early childhood education. I've worked on 0 to 3, birth to 3 engagement work. I've worked on anti-poverty programs, housing programs. I've worked on K through 12 programs like making sure food can be nutritious in schools so kids can go and learn. I've worked on all kinds of issues before I was a legislator. One of the first pieces of legislation that I championed in South Carolina was an emergency medical services bill for children to train every EMT on how to deliver emergency medical services to children, because you can't deliver emergency medical services to children the same way you do to adults. You cannot do a tracheotomy on a 2-year-old. So this is something that's very close and very passionate to my heart. You will hear my passion come out in this presentation. And if you hear that, don't be alarmed, it's just me being passionate about the future. And when I say the future, I want you to think about the word investment. I'm going to talk about investments today. No, I don't have a Series 6. No, I'm not a stockbroker. No, I don't work on Wall Street. But I work with enough financial services organizations as a consultant that I understand the importance of investment, and I think most of us do too. The second thing I want you to take away is the importance of doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time. I'm going to give you that as well. And the third thing I want you to focus on is going to be legacy. So investments, doing the right thing, and legacy. And so I want to start by sharing a little bit of a story and an experience. And this is my early years as an organizer. I worked at a nonprofit in Columbia, South Carolina, is where I live now. That is my home now. I worked at this nonprofit, and I got a call from a small rural county in South Carolina called Allendale County. And the gentleman who called me, his name was Alonzo Frazier. He was a stalwart in the community, kind of like an old community legend, if you will. And he called me, he says, Anton, we need your help in Allendale. I said, what do you need my help with? He said, the education system is messed up. It is failing our children, and we got all kinds of problems. And I've organized a community meeting, and I want you to come and meet some of these parents and let them tell you the stories about what's happening to their kids in school. Now, to context Allendale, I want you to understand, in the state of South Carolina, we have 46 counties. Allendale County was the poorest county in the state at the time. The school system had been in receivership for 3 years at the time. They couldn't even control their own schools. The governor had all kinds of negative declarative statements about how bad Allendale was. The poverty rate was the highest poverty rate in the entire state of South Carolina. It was a place where you would not send your worst enemy. It was bad. So when Alonzo called, I was happy to go and help, because I care about kids everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, I care about the future of every generation and the future of what we need in America. So I went down to Allendale. I went to this house, a bunch of families in the house. There were some kids in the house with the families. And everybody was talking about, a kid is failing, we don't have good, nutritious food, and this doesn't work, kids can't get to school on time. But I'm hearing every story in the world. And then I get introduced to this husband and wife couple who had their son there. Their son's name was Jamal. And Jamal, I asked him, I said, how old are you, Jamal? I'm 12. I said, well, nice to meet you. 12 years old, huh? So how's middle school going? I'm not in middle school. You're not in middle school? I asked a few more questions, and I would quickly learn that Jamal was 12 years old in the 5th grade. When he was 12 years old in the 5th grade, I was like, I know the school system is failing him because he's 2 grades behind. And so I was ready to organize and go down and protest at the school, the principal, and everybody else until I asked a few more questions. And when I asked a few more questions, what I learned to follow is that number one, Jamal's parents worked at a factory in town that closed up 3 years before. They both worked there, and when the factory closed up and went overseas, they lost their jobs. And there were no real jobs in the county. So neither Jamal, mom or dad, had health insurance coverage. So when they didn't have health insurance coverage, and they lived in a rural corner part of the county, the health department was 30 miles away. And because the health department was 30 miles away, Jamal did not get his immunizations. And when he didn't get his immunizations, he couldn't start school on time like every other kindergartner at 5. So he started at 6, 1 year behind all of his classmates. The second thing I learned is that when his parents were chronically unemployed and he didn't have immunizations and they didn't have health insurance coverage, when he was in the 3rd grade, he developed an abscess in his mouth and his teeth because he hadn't seen a dentist in many, many years. And because of the abscess and the infection that he got, he missed a whole lot of days at school. And because he missed a whole lot of days at school, they retained him in the 3rd grade. So the real reason why Jamal is 12 years old and in the 5th grade was not because the school system was failing him, but the entire structure of the healthcare system was failing him. That's just one story to help you to understand how all of these things are interconnected. And that if we invest in the right infrastructure, and when I mean infrastructure, I'm not talking about buildings, I'm talking about the infrastructure of people, children in the earliest parts of their lives. When we make those strategic investments, we build a strong foundation that gives us a great return. Second thing I want you to understand is that most of us in here probably understand a little bit about the stock market. If you don't, I'm going to give you a little bit of education. Every financial advisor that I've ever met with says your goal, Anton, whatever investment you make, your goal is to try to beat the market. So the market might be 8%, might be 9%. The goal is to get a 10% return on your investment. Everybody knows 10% is a good ROI. 10% is a good ROI when you're investing in the market. So if you invested $100, the goal is year over year to add $10 to that 100. So in 1 year, $100 to $110. That is a good ROI. Now, would you be excited if I told you a way that if you made a $100 investment, I was going to give you $1,000 in return? If you made a $100 investment, you're going to get $1,000 in return. Is that better than getting $10 in return? I need more than some head nods. Is that better?
Yes.
Oh yes, right? Well, I want you to understand the child tax credit. For every dollar we invest gives us a $10 return, a 10x return on our investment to society. And kids like Jamal, who were in poverty, may have an opportunity to not be in poverty, not to be 2 grades behind, where we know that when you're 2 grades behind, there's a 50% chance you won't finish high school. You definitely won't earn as much as anybody else who is on par. You might end up in a life of crime. You might be in all kinds of difficult circumstances that contribute to many challenges that we see that Congressman Lee has championed for years. So we know there is a 10x return on investment when we make that investment. So I want all of us to understand that we have an opportunity every single day when we think about children, when we think about the budget, of how we deliver a 10x investment. It is not just a good thing to do. In my opinion, it's the most important national security issue that we don't talk about. So when we think about national security, we always talk about about missiles, bombs, and rockets, and cybersecurity, and all of these other things. But the strength of a nation is its people. The strength of a nation is its next generation. And smart countries, the countries who are accelerating on any growth chart that you think about, from every positive narrative you want to frame, are the nations that understand that its greatest investment is making sure it has strong, secure people. And so when we invest in children, it is a national security benefit to us. And I'll give you a second example of that. Everybody in this room probably knows the name Bill Gates. If you don't know the name Bill Gates, I'm certain you got Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or some other application on your phone, tablet, laptop, or something that you use. Bill Gates has built an incredibly massive company over many, many years that is integral to most of our lives. It's not just integral to our daily lives, but it's also integral to our national security. Because there's so many Microsoft divisions who have partnered with our nation's military to protect us in national security, cybersecurity, defense intelligence, enterprise security. Not only that, so many other aspects that I can't name here. The whole Halo project, where soldiers and sailors and Marines get trained with a Halo, is a Microsoft product. So that is investment in our national security. But Bill Gates being able to do that all started with an investment in education. You know why? Because where Bill Gates went to high school, Lakeside in Seattle, Washington, was the first high school in the United States of America in the 1960s to have a computer in the classroom. Now I want you to understand that you cannot disconnect the fact that because there was a computer in a school and nobody else had the opportunity to see how that technology worked, that it did not help Bill Gates to accelerate his interest, his commitment and investment to build something that we all now depend on. So if we think about investing in kids, how can we make sure that every kid has access to what they need for the next 50 years? That is an important national security issue. Now, the third thing I'm going to say as I get ready to close, I want you to understand something else. That everyone in this room has a greater responsibility than themselves. There are 3 values that I live by. These are Anton's values. I won't lay them out for everybody else. I won't expect you to abide by them, but my values, number 1, first is service. I believe service is a prerequisite of leadership. I come from a family of 4 generations of men who served in the United States military. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad and all my uncles, and I'm in that 4th generation. I didn't serve. I went to college to play football at the University of South Carolina. I'm a Gamecock football player, so if you don't know anything about SEC football, shame on you. But my brother Sharon served in the United States Navy. He joined the Navy in January 2000. And unfortunately, 9 months after joining the Navy, he was deployed on the USS Cole, and on October 12th, he was killed by 2 Al-Qaeda suicide bombers in a terrorist attack. My brother only lived to be 22 years old. He never had the opportunity to build a future. He never had the opportunity to invest and create a legacy. So my first value is service, and my second value is legacy. And that is, there's a great quote from Dr. Miles Monroe, and that quote says, "Success without a successor is a failure." I want to repeat that. Success without a successor is a failure. And so my challenge to every person in this room who plays a role in making policy and investing in children and helping to shape our budget, that I want you to understand that the decisions that you make today are a legacy for our future. And you might be successful in your job, but if you don't make an investment in children in our future, you will never be significant. And we got to stop chasing success in the policy process and checking off boxes and tick for tack. But how do we make a decision that is significant? We make a significant decision when we understand that investing in children is smart policy. It's a policy that nobody will disagree with. Doesn't matter what lens of the world you come into from a political standpoint. It's something that we all can agree in. It's something that we all have experienced. Again, we've all been children. Even if you don't have children, you know children. So the context is, how do we live a significant life? We live a significant life by living my third value. And my third value is empowerment. And I believe that as a leader, I have the greatest responsibility to use my knowledge, my skills, and my experience to give people the tools, the information, and the resources to determine their own destiny. It's not my job to determine what your destiny is. It's my job to give you the tools, the information, and the resources to determine your own destiny. But if we don't invest in children, we're not giving them the information. We're not giving them the tools. We're not giving them the resources to determine their own destiny and the destiny of our country. And so my challenge to all of you, as you think about and go about your days, number one, continue to serve. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're serving in the capacity that you're in. Continue to serve. But continue to focus on a legacy that is bigger than yourself. Bigger than the person who will replace you in your job. Bigger than the person who's going to come along after you, way after you. But right now, empower our nation to be strong and secure because you made an investment in children. It is literally the greatest ROI we could ever receive in life. So I want to thank you for your time and your attention. My name is Anton Gordon. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to share with you today. Thank you.
That was awesome, and really, I really appreciate Anton and his long service and dedication to kids. And so he talked about why we need to be doing this, and really made that case so very well. And Chris is going to now tell us about how we're not doing that and what we need to do to change. So, Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, hi everyone. I'm going to present our results of the Children's Budget 2024. What we're going to do with this project is to look across the entire federal budget. We track over 250 programs and understand how much of the money in the federal budget is going to children and families of children in order to meet their needs. And overall, we try to answer two big picture questions. One, what is the share of federal spending that's going to children? Are children being made a priority in our federal budget decisions? And then, what direction are we headed? Are we moving in the right direction and continuing to invest more and more in children? Are we actually going backwards and deprioritizing children in the decisions that we're making? Unfortunately, as Bruce alluded to, the answer to both of those questions is not going to be very positive in this presentation. But what we hope is that regardless of the results, that this will be a useful resource for lawmakers, for staff, for advocates to understand the current state of children's policy, to shine a spotlight on some of the places where we're not investing enough, and ultimately a tool for accountability. There's a lot of rhetoric across the political spectrum, a lot of agreement that children matter, that we should be investing in children, that we should be setting up their futures. But unfortunately, as you can see, that's not really happening. So we want to make sure that politicians are going to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting children. So right now, in this presentation, I'm going to just go over the main headline results. But when the whole book comes out, there's going to be a lot more detail in there. We have over 250 programs that we cover across 19 different federal departments and countless agencies within those. And so children's policy is really across the entire government, and we really need a holistic approach to meeting children's needs across a lot of different areas. We also group our programs that we track into these 10 different issue areas, and so we have a detailed breakdown of the trends in each of those, as well as for each individual program. So that's what we look forward to in the entire As far as the headline results that we find, like I said, they're not very positive. In fiscal year 2024, for the third straight year, we find that the share of federal spending going to children has declined. And so we peaked in fiscal year 2021 at almost 12% of the federal budget going to children and their families. But for 3 years in a row, that's come down all the way to now in fiscal year 2024, 8.84%. So we're about a quarter, 25% off of where we were at the high that we achieved during the pandemic. The same is true if we were just looking at total dollars spent. That has declined from slightly above 800 billion all the way down to slightly below 600 billion. So the numbers here are really large in terms of the disinvestment in children. We are spending less on children, and not only is the spending itself going down, but the share is going down. And so we are prioritizing children less in terms of compared to other priorities. So not very good news there. It's actually even a little bit worse than that though, because we're giving this money to families with children who are then spending it on the things that children need, whether that's nutritious food, schooling, healthcare, and all these things cost money. And we also know that prices have been going up. All of these things that children need are becoming more expensive. And so if you had flat funding, even if you kept funding exactly where it was, if prices are going up, those dollars that we're giving children are not going as far. And so we also calculate the change in funding provided to children adjusted for inflation. And so even though inflation has come down a lot, we still find that federal spending on children in fiscal year 2024 declined by 5.74%. So almost 6% less purchasing power for families with children in terms of the federal support that they receive. And again, this is the third straight year that has happened. Why is the funding down? Well, in fiscal year 2024, the big drivers here are nutrition programs. And so we did a lot during the pandemic to support children, including two programs, pandemic EBT and emergency allotments within SNAP that provided for the nutritional needs of kids during that time. And unfortunately, both of those have disappeared in fiscal year 2024. We've allowed those supports to expire, and overall, that has led to the decline that we're seeing from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024. So we've really seen a big disinvestment in nutrition programs. The other thing I would point out is that that's really on top of a lot of other disinvestments that had already happened. We expanded the child tax credit and then got rid of that. We had an expansion of the Child Care Development Block Grant and then lost that. So this is really kind of just the last domino to fall of all these great things that we did during the pandemic that we've now allowed to go away. Here I have a graph just showing some of the biggest drivers of the decline, and you can see right at the top, pandemic EBT and SNAP are the two biggest drivers by a pretty considerable amount. I will point to some small positive news, which is that advocacy for more spending on children did make a difference. We saw, for example, that WIC spending actually went up by 14%. We also saw the implementation of a permanent summer EBT program that partially filled in the gap for the loss of that pandemic EBT. Now, the important note, these are not nearly on the scale that we had for the pandemic programs. This is a lot less money. That's why we see this net decline. But it still shows that if we fight for wins where we can get them, we can still make some difference and move things in a slightly less negative direction at the very least. And I just want to point towards some of the data on poverty. We've talked a lot about poverty in these presentations that we've seen. And we know that the programs that we implemented during the pandemic were effective in reducing poverty. You can see this is from a fact sheet that my colleague Kara just put out on the newly released poverty numbers for 2023. And what we have here is for each of these individual programs, how many children they lifted out of poverty in 2021, which is the blue bars, 2022, which is the yellow bars, and then 2023, which is the red bars. And we can see those blue bars are way out there to the right. Many of these programs lifting hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. We've talked about the child tax credit. That and refundable tax credits in general are a huge driver there, but also things like SNAP, things like school lunch. We lifted millions of children out of poverty, and so we know these programs work. Poverty is still an emergency, whether we're at the pandemic or not, and we need to get back to where we were when we had that record low poverty rate that Bruce was talking about. I would also note this is only up to 2023. The poverty data comes out a little bit, with a lag, and so it'll look even worse in 2024 in terms of the loss of some of those nutrition programs. The last thing I want to talk about is the international side. Our numbers overall count domestic and international spending on children, and there are two things I want to emphasize. One is that the spending on children internationally is a very small fraction, even of total spending on children. And so our estimate is that we have just under $6 billion spent in the foreign assistance budget that's going to children. That's only about 100th of our estimate for children spending domestically. So a very small portion going to international spending for children. And out of the whole federal budget, that's only about 0.09%. So the spending that we're doing internationally for kids is just very, very paltry. A lot more needs to be done there. We do see what a better future could look like in the president's budget for fiscal year 2025. A lot of it is just going back to what we were doing during the pandemic. And so if we were to actually enact the proposed budget from the Biden administration for fiscal year 2025, we would spend about $200 billion more on children than we currently are in the fiscal year 2024 budget. The biggest part of that is the child tax credit, expanding fundability and expanding the amount of money that goes to kids. That alone, just that part of the proposed budget, would provide about $186 billion to kids, which is a 648% increase over the amount now. We're just not reaching enough children or providing them enough money with the current way that the child tax credit is set up. Next slide. Okay, that's what I got for you today. In terms of what you can find in the rest of the book, you can find all of these numbers on the overall budget that I've been talking about. But there's also chapter overviews of those 10 issue areas I showed you earlier: nutrition, education, health, and so on. So you can see a detailed breakdown of that, along with a lot of context given by our policy experts on our team that are providing some of the main details in each of those areas. And then you can find all of the 250 plus programs that we track in terms of the trends in their funding and the overall levels. So we hope that level of detail can be a great resource to you all as well. That's all I got for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I encourage you to check out the full children's budget when it comes out. And thank you so much to our other speakers. Thank you.
Does anyone have any question for Chris or also just
Hearing you guys talk has been incredible, very insightful. That being said, what do you think is the reasoning why some government officials would be against investing in our future like this, especially considering the rate of return that we're getting? Do you think that it's just an ignorance problem, or are there deeper reasons behind it? And what do you think is the first step in changing their minds?
Yeah, I think that what the research will tell you on some of this, and some of it's somewhat obvious, is that kids don't have political power, right? They don't vote, they don't have political action committees, they don't have, and so there was a really interesting polling done on, it wasn't a poll, it was like a research study on asking two different questions of the public. So one question was they looked at 73 different groups and asked people, how would you rate these groups based on political power, right? So pharmaceutical companies, Chamber of Commerce, those kinds of things, and then children and other groups. And kids were one of the lowest scoring groups in terms of people's assessment of their political power. But then they asked the second question is, who's the most deserving? And kids were the second highest. Kids were higher than groups you would think would be way up there, like senior citizens. So And when it comes to who people think, and actually I don't want to step on Kate's presentation because she's going to be talking about this, but the public is actually very supportive of, and really do believe that kids are the right place to be making. And I think that Anton's point of the return on investment is something that we really need to educate people about. But it makes sense, right? Like, you know, if you're building a house, the foundation is the key thing to do. Because if you don't, then the walls crumble and everything else. And that's what we're doing, is we're failing to invest in our foundation. And it's really educating people about that. So I think some of it is, it's just a political issue that is why advocates and, you know, we need policymakers to be champions like, you know, Barbara Lee has been amazing, and Senator Whitehouse and other people who are just so great about really championing kids and understanding, but also I think it's really an education thing. So advocates need to do a better job of really explaining, you know, why this is so important. So I would say those are the things to answer your question. Anybody else? I also just want to point out that Chris has also done amazing work on, we have another publication on our website, Babies in the Budget. So you can look at this sort of same assessment in terms of how much money we're spending on just kids 0 to 3, and it's 1.52% of the federal budget. So kids are, you know, and I would point out that when you look at a number like 8.84, to give some context, it's not a complete apples to apple comparison, but kids are about a quarter of the population. And then with respect to international, kids are about a third of the population. So we're only investing 10% of all the international spending. So, you know, international spending is a pittance, and then even then we're only spending like 10% when kids are a third. So we're just not putting the money where in our children in a way that I think would be more beneficial for us here in this country, but also internationally. So now I'm going to turn over to Kate, and thank you, Kate, for everything. And if you need, Tim, thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I work at Lake Research Partners. I want to acknowledge our whole team: Celinda Lake, Alicia Snell, Jenna Scarborough, Lina Tate, and Izzy Vineyard, who do a lot of the work that I get to share with them today. I also am a mom, so I'm here as a pollster and a mom today, and I really resonated with what you said. And then Bruce, thank you so much, and thank you to your whole team. This research is so important, and it really paints a picture. So if you could advance this one, please. Okay, here's what we did. We did a national survey in 2022 among likely 2022 voters. This is a representative sample that was conducted on the phone. We also, because of the investment from First Focus, were able to do extra sample among folks who are Black likely voters, Latino and Latina likely voters, as well as parents of kids who are under 18. And if you're familiar with polling, you know that these extra samples allow us to have a more robust look at these populations so that they're representative in the survey that we do. And we also do these bonus interviews so that we can have more confidence about the findings of those groups. So I have 3 big picture findings that I want you all to take away from this study that we conducted. One is that voters are already here. They really believe that we are investing too little in children. And so that's generally overall, and then it's even higher when we get into some specifics. And it's really high. And you don't get these high numbers unless you're pretty much bringing everybody along. So these are things that men agree, women agree, younger, older, parents, non-parents, across the political spectrum, and across educational attainment. Folks are in agreement. We might have disagreements on other things, but we are in agreement on the idea that we are spending too little on children. We also tested the description of the child tax credit, and that tests very well. It's a very strong policy that has a lot of support, and it also is another place where there's a lot of agreement across party. And then the last thing I want you to take away is that we tested some language. How do we talk about this? And people really responded to this language. And it is about investing in children and their futures, and tying that to the economic benefits, the benefits for their health and the benefits for their well-being as well. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. Okay. I wish this slide looked a little different. It looks like the formatting is a little off from what I wanted, but the main takeaway here is that voters think, and it's over half of voters think, that the federal government is spending too little on children. And what we did here is on the left side of the screen, we have the people who think we spend too little overall, and on the right side of the screen, we told people that the federal government spent 7.6% of all of its money on children. And what you can see is there's not really a difference between informing them and not informing them about that. They're already there, they already think it's too little. Giving them that information does not change it one way or another. Here you can see the different subgroups that we looked at. So we broke this out by gender by age, party identification, educational attainment, parents by gender, so if you're a parent or not a parent by gender, as well as race, and then we also looked at grandparents and non-grandparents. And the real takeaway here is across the board, every group is saying we are spending too little on children. That is the top response across every single group that we looked at. The folks who are the very most likely to say it's too little are younger men and women, Democrats, and Black voters. Those are the ones who are like, whoa, way too low here. And you can also see that among our independents, they're a little bit more likely than other groups to say it's probably about right, but still by 12 additional points, they're saying it's too low. Next slide. So then I alluded to this, we asked all kinds of different areas where we could be spending the right amount, too little or too much on children. And the takeaway here is that every single thing, except for providing children access to vaccines, the takeaway is that we are spending too little. The things that are really resonating with people are reducing child abuse and neglect, accessing mental health services, and reducing child health poverty, reducing child homelessness, and reducing child hunger. Those are really the top tier. And again, we don't get these high numbers of agreement unless we're bringing everybody along. So in the next few slides, I'll show you how the different subgroups are reacting to these policies. And the circles are very off here, but the circles were supposed to show y'all the ones that were like really sticking out to people in the different subgroups. So what I want you to take away from this wall of numbered and misaligned circles is that across gender and age, party identification, educational attainment, parental status, and race, people are saying like we are not spending a lot on this top tier of policies. Most of groups, it's a majority. We start to just only a plurality of Republicans on some of these, but there's really agreement across the board among everybody. I'll also point out parents and non-parents. You do not have to be a parent currently of a child under 18 to think that we are spending too little in all of these different areas. All right, the next slide, please. Okay, here we have kind of what is the second or third tier. So we still have majorities in a lot of these subgroups, pluralities in a lot of these subgroups who are saying we are spending too little money on affordable housing for families with children, early childhood education, assistance for childcare expenses, and helping families with low income meet basic needs. I'll also point out that among Democrats and among Black voters, housing is one of the top things. And that really makes them stand apart from other subgroups. They are saying we're spending too little on housing, on access to affordable housing for families with children. Next slide. Here's the last group of policies that we tested. And these are the ones where we start to get a bit more of a partisan separation, especially providing gun violence and providing affordable health insurance to children. Republicans are starting to, on these policies, to split up between the idea that we're spending too little, about the right amount, or too much. Independents actually on health insurance say that we're spending about the right amount. And then across subgroups, remember this was in May of 2022, across subgroups, the lowest one was that we're spending too little on was vaccines. At this point, many children were old enough and the vaccines had been rolled out for COVID, but the youngest children had not received their first COVID vaccines yet. But this is good news, that people were like, we actually think we're doing a good job on this and addressing this appropriately. But all other stuff, they would like to see a larger investment. Okay, the next section is child tax credit. So we describe the child tax credit as something that Congress passed in 2021. We said it is an expanded and improved tax credit that refunds middle-class families and families with low incomes more money for each child under 18. It creates a new tax credit for families with children under the age of 6, and it makes the credit fully refundable for all families with low incomes. That's what people were reacting to, and that's what they like. We have 57% who say that they strongly favor the child tax credit, 72% favored overall. This is a huge margin between favor and oppose. This is a wildly popular idea. Here you can see how we break it out by different subgroups. And again, we have very large margins across every subgroup between favor and oppose. The groups that are the most likely to favor the child tax credit are Democrats and Black voters, but this is something that really voters across all kinds of different ways that we look at them are saying, we favor this, we would like this, here is this. I also looked at some recent studies that have been released this year on the child tax credit. So Navigator released a poll just a few weeks ago, or maybe almost a month ago now in August, where they talked to 1,000 registered voters, and they asked people 2 questions. One is, do you think a policy would help or hurt American families broadly? And then the other question is, would a policy help or hurt American families like yours? And the child tax credit is the one at the bottom. And you can see here that 78% say that it would help American families broadly, 65% say it would help families like theirs. And then for the idea that the child tax credit would help American families broadly, again, this is a place where we have support across party identification. So 87% of Democrats, 72% of Republicans, and 70% of independents, they believe that a child tax credit would be helpful for American families. Earlier in the year, keep going, yeah, perfect, okay. Earlier in the year, Navigator asked another question about the child tax credit, and they talked about it. It's a bipartisan proposal in Congress to temporarily expand and improve the child tax credit to refund poor working and middle class families more money for each child under the age of 17. Our blue numbers here are support, the red are oppose, and then on the very right you can see the net support, so the support minus oppose. And again, across the board, all kinds of different voters, party ID, race, and parents and non-parents say that they support improving the child tax credit. So I hope we all take away from this, we love the child tax credit. Next slide is our messaging, and this is pretty much the last thing I'm going to share with you all today. We tested a couple of different statements that people have made, and we asked people if they agree or disagree with them. The key part of these statements is kind of off. I don't know if we can really adjust it at all. But what you can take away from this, even if you can't read all of the language, is that this is something that people strongly agree with. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about it as like a good investment, good for their health, good for their well-being, has a return on investment, they need greater investment. People really agree with it, these statements. The takeaway here again is that these things are very popular. You do not get into 3/4 or more people strongly agreeing with something unless this is something that pretty much every group says, yes, we're on board with us. And that is it for me. This is just, I wanted to show quickly the demographics of the survey in case anybody had any questions about who we talked to. So thank you so much, and keep up the fabulous work.
One quick question.
And for Kate and for Bruce, there's polling and then there's politics. And it seems like the polling is pretty clear, but when you get down to brass tacks, children lose. The votes are not for children. The most recent example is the child tax credit here in the Senate. It's voted down. So how do you square that circle? I mean, what's missing? Kind of gets back to this gentleman's question earlier. If the polling is there, why aren't politics there?
So I think in the case of the child tax credit, it's some of the same thing that I was saying, is that sometimes also this is kind of a weird, I don't know, there's got to be a good axiom for this, but it's because kid programs are popular. One of the things that unfortunately I think happens sometimes, and I have quotes that members have said this, is they do hostage taking. So I think a lot of the vote in the Senate this past year was, because this passed overwhelmingly, the improved child tax credit passed overwhelmingly in the House, but in the Senate, I think there was, I mean, some members blatantly said it was, we want to hold this because we know that it's popular, and so that will help us pass our tax bill next year when we're in charge. And Josh talked about this. I think there's some belief by some members that they'll then be in charge, and then they can hold this hostage, and this will be a nice little add into a tax package that will probably have tax cuts for some groups that are not so popular, and this will help carry it across the line. So I think that happens. I mean, we saw this when the Children's Health Insurance Program expired. There was a few members of the U.S. Senate who blatantly said that they were holding it hostage to try to get further a budget agenda actually at the time. So I think that it's kind of interesting. Like I think people recognize that some of these things are very popular and then use it hostage taking. And I think it's the other problem is that kids don't have the political power to force action on it, and so that combination sometimes is a problem. That makes sense. Agree. You actually have opinions about this too. I know. So, but, all right. So thank you so much, Kate. And also I'll say a couple things. Is we will definitely put her slides. I'm sorry that the formatting got messed up. Because I promised when she said that they looked awesome. And so we'll put them on our website, and so I won't promise exactly when, but we'll get those up for people, and we'll put them on the page for the Children's Budget Summit, and so that you can see them. I'll also do a ridiculous plug, but Sally and I host a podcast called Speaking of Kids, and we hosted Kate's boss, Linda Lake, on it, and she just like Kate, she did a really amazing job talking about a lot of these numbers, but even this sort of this broader context that you were asking about and you were asking about. So, a very ridiculous plug for our podcast, but if you want to listen more about it, it's Linda Lake, episode 2, Speaking of Kids. And now I'll turn it over to my awesome friend Daniela Ligero, and she's gonna talk about sort of the international issues, and I think as Chris showed, it is a pittance that we're spending, and yet we're having a hard time fighting to improve that, but she can talk about the context of international things. Oh, thank you.
Hello everyone, it's so good to be here. Before I start, I just want to say, I want to date myself a little, especially, and say over 20 years ago when I started my career here in the Senate, the building next door, Bruce and I had a chance to work together. And I want to say that at that time, you were a champion for children, and your whole team deserves the prize of champions for children as well, because the work that you have done has just been phenomenal, and we owe you a debt of gratitude, you and your whole team. So thank you so much. So as Bruce mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about what we do internationally. And I've had the opportunity not only to work in the Senate, I work in the UN, and the Department of State, and the Obama administration as well for many years, and in a lot of other roles. And I just want to start with what Bruce said just now. The amount of funding we as a nation spend on foreign assistance is a small portion of our budget. And if you look at the richest countries in the world in terms of proportion of how much they spend a lot more than we do. And then if you take that further, we're spending 9 cents on the dollar when it comes to children. And if you think of the population of children around the world, it is about a third. So the levels are just completely off. And a question I get often is, well, why should we be spending money abroad when we have needs at home, right? That's a very fair good question. And what I like to say is, it's an investment. Thank you, Anton, for starting this off there. The folio also shows it resonates, because it's true. It is an investment that we make in a few ways. The first is, how do we show up in the world? Our values, the things we say matter. When we stand up for democracy, when we stand up for human rights, when we stand up for justice, that matters. And when we stand up for kids, that matters. That influences how other governments think about these issues and how they invest in these issues. It helps with building goodwill, our alliances. We talked a little bit about national security. That is so true not only domestically, but also internationally. Because we know that countries that invest in their own children to make sure that kids are healthy, that they're educated and are safe, have less conflict, less instability, less violent extremism, and every single indicator we look at, whether it's economic development or peace and security, is improved when there are investments in children. And our foreign assistance to the poorest countries around the world allows them and helps them to make those investments. So it's not about making the investments for them, it's about working with them to help ensure that those investments are happening at national level in countries around the world. And as a result, we are safer. And as a result, we are able to show the world what matters and what our values are. And that pays dividends. Sorry to be silly, a lot of you, we did not meet before this, or we gotta do this, but it pays dividends that go beyond anything that we could expect. So it matters what we are spending on children in our foreign assistance. And I want to give you an example, because there are many ways in which the U.S. government is currently spending. As you saw, it continues to go down. We need to be doing a lot more. But one important piece has to do with safety. And I would say, when we think of kids, we need to make sure they're healthy, they're educated, and they're safe. And I want to talk about safety a bit. Because as part of the work that we've done in my organization, working closely with the U.S. government, one of the things that the U.S. government has done over the last 15 years is, through investments in CDC and the work that CDC does globally, as well as through PEPFAR, investing in understanding what's happening around the world at national levels when it comes to violence against children and adolescents, all forms of violence. And because we know that kids who experience violence in childhood or witness violence in childhood are much more likely to perpetrate violence later on in their lives, and these cycles of violence continue and affect not only families and communities, but entire nations. And that has also implications for the U.S. government. There are lots of studies for us here at home and for how we engage with other nations. And so, and I want to share this story with you because I think it really shows how sometimes small investments can really pay dividends. So about 15 years ago, I was, had the honor of working on PEPFAR at the time. We heard from Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who was a huge champion of PEPFAR. And as part of that 10% OVC earmark that you mentioned, this idea of focusing on kids, we were looking at the fact that in sub-Saharan Africa, the levels of HIV among adolescent girls was 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 times higher than boys, depending on the country. And we were like, something's going on. This epidemic is ravaging countries. And what is happening for adolescent girls? And we had this idea that sexual violence might be driving the epidemic. But we didn't really know what was happening in these countries. No one did. So the CDC had this idea, why don't we take a public health approach? And instead of just reading about the horrible rape case in the newspaper, or looking at what's coming forward at a health clinic, which is the tip of the iceberg, let's really understand what's happening with an entire nation when it comes to violence against children and adolescents, starting with girls and sexual violence. And this public health approach happened in a small country in southern Africa called Eswatini, previously Swaziland. And CDC worked with the national government there, UNICEF and other partners, to do this study that it became the first ever violence against children use survey. And it found that approximately 1/3 of all girls in that country had experienced some form of sexual violence before their 18th birthday. And it was able to tell us who the main perpetrators were, what the locations were where this violence was happening, what the consequences were, like HIV and unintended pregnancy, and also what were some of the protective factors, and what were some of the ways in which we could make sure that this wasn't happening over and over again to kids in that country. And as a result, a series of policies and programs and interventions led by the government were implemented. And a decade later, we were able to repeat that survey. And it showed that sexual violence in that country for girls went down by over half. It is huge what happened. The same has happened in Kenya, where we were able to repeat, and we could show that sexual violence went down by 58% for girls. And over again, at this point, that methodology has been repeated, and it has happened now in countries around the world. We now have data through this gold standard methodology that the US government started and is now being applied globally only in 15 years. And we now have data for over 12% of the world's population under 24 on violence. It's the most comprehensive data set there is. And if you look at the poorest countries in the world, we have data from 33% of those young people, children and adolescents. And in every country where this survey is happening, it's been over 24 countries, the national government has come in and responded and implemented programs and policies that are making a difference for kids. Now, right now, this funding to support these VACs within CDC is at risk. And as of next year, that funding will no longer be there because of changing priorities and changes in the budget. And this is an example of 15 years of work that the US government has led for children and made a difference around the world at risk because of some of the budget cuts that we're seeing. And I'm especially concerned about this because we have this huge political opportunity that's happening right now. You might not be aware of it, but I'm living and breathing this every day. In the first week of November, there will be the first ever global summit on violence against children. It is a high-level ministerial meeting organized by the World Health Organization, by UNICEF, and led by the governments of Sweden and Colombia, who have really stepped up for kids and are making investments in preventing and responding to violence against children, are examples that we should be following. And they are pulling together the first ever summit to look at the issue of violence against kids, to really think about how safety, in addition to all the things we were talking about, impacts outcomes that are important to kids. And this is huge and amazing, and there are over 110 delegations from countries around the world that have already signed up for this. And we're showing up at this summit in November with an opportunity for the US government to make some important commitments around how we lead on this issue globally and how we lead on this issue domestically. And so the whole global community and allies from around the US have come together and are asking the government to put $10 million into CDC to continue this work with these surveys. It's $10 million. It's a fraction of what we spend on so many other things. And I think it's an opportunity for the US to continue to show its leadership around the world. And I want to end on a personal note. A few of you started with a personal note. I want to end on a personal note. And I want to say, when we talk about these statistics, it's sometimes easy to lose sight of real people, and I really appreciated, Anton, some of the examples you gave of real people, and people you've met, and people you've had a chance to interact with. And when we think of violence, we know that the numbers are just horrendous, and it can be pretty overwhelming. When we look, for example, at sexual violence against children and adolescents, we know from these surveys and other data that about 1 in 4 girls around the world and in the US, and about 1 in 10 boys have experienced some form of sexual violence before their 18th birthday. And I want to tell you that I'm here speaking to you as a mom of 2 daughters, as a psychologist, as a professional who has spent 25 years working on these issues, and as a survivor myself of childhood sexual violence. I was sexually abused by someone close to my family, starting at the age of 6. And you know, my parents were highly educated, and we always talked to me about stranger danger and those kinds of things, but never about what to do if it was someone close and someone who was close to our family. And I'm telling you this not to be depressing, but to give you hope and to show that investments in children make a difference. Because I always like to say I'm one of the few fortunate ones. I was able to eventually tell my parents it was happening, and because they had resources, I was able to get the mental health support I needed and the various kinds of support around all these years that have helped me heal, that have helped me become the person I am today, the professional I am today, the mother I am today, the leader I am today. And so, even when bad things happen to kids, if we invest in them and if we help them become the people we know they can be, that is a story of hope. That is a story of change. And as Americans, within our country and around the world, for us to say it matters when we do that. And it shouldn't have to matter how much money parents have in a bank account. When a kid experiences child abuse, when a kid experiences that, they should have access to those same services to help them become the people they were meant to be. And so when you shared your polling around child abuse and neglect and mental health as two important issues, I felt called to share that because I think these are important investments, and when you make them, it can make a difference, and it does make a difference. I'm going to close with a quote and give it to you, Bruce, to end. Since I'm talking about foreign assistance, I have this in front of me in my office. It's the quote from the great Nelson Mandela, who I had the honor of meeting before his passing. And he said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." I hope that we as Americans are able to live up to that truth. Thank you so much.
So I don't think I said your group, but it's Together for Girls. And not only do they do international, but they're doing domestic stuff too. So I just encourage you to look at their website and all the amazing work they're doing. They're such awesome partners in our space, and just love all that you're doing. So we have like 2 or 3 minutes, and if anyone has any questions for any of our speakers, I'm going to say I think they were all amazing. People all stayed, so I really appreciate everyone staying and being here early. Any questions for Anton, Daniela, Kate, Josh, maybe, Chris?
I'm sorry, answer the question?
Yeah, come on.
So there was a question earlier about, is it ignorance? It was your question about whether it's ignorance, whether people don't know. I'll put it to you this way. Information is important, but people don't respond to information. If we all responded to all the information we have, we'd all be rich and skinny right now. Right? So the context is to understand that I had a business mentor tell me, facts tell, but stories sell. And you heard from all of us a personal story that gave the facts and information that you were going to receive. We wrapped it into a human experience. And that's what people connect to. If we think about how we've survived as a species on this planet, it's by storytelling. It's telling stories, the stories we have in our families that we pass down. So big context is people don't know the information, number one. So they don't have any data or facts, and you've got a lot here today. But the second thing is they don't have a human experience that demonstrates the evidence of that story. And so you've gotten some of that today, and that's why I think you all have a different and higher perspective today. But just know always, it's important to never tell a story without a point, and the point is the facts, and never make a point without telling a story. You gotta always have them together. So I wanted to answer that.
That's awesome.
And I'll tell a story about the public, and it was a thing that we did with Lake Research. It was really fascinating. We had a focus group. I can't remember what year that was. It was a long time ago, and but it was fascinating because Celinda, and then she also had another moderator asking people questions like, "What are your priorities?" And it was really interesting. We also did something with Frank Lund, so we actually had to do something bipartisan. basis. And in both of those focus groups, it's people are not quick to think about kids, because people think about kids sort of in the bubble of families and don't really think about public policy necessarily. So it's interesting, over time the polling on some of this has changed. It used to be education and child abuse were at the top. And now these other things have come, and I think that's because people saw during the pandemic these enormous problems around mental health and poverty, and also people often tell us not to talk about poverty. You can see, you ask a question about poverty, people get it with kids in a very different way. But people would say maybe education, and they would talk about care, but they wouldn't necessarily think about it. And so what Anton's talking about is very important, because then when Celinda asked the question, or Frank Luntz asked the question, so what about kids you care about? They couldn't even finish the question, because people would be like, oh my God. So people do care deeply, they just don't, it's not top of mind, because they don't think about public policy in the same way for kids as they do as other populations. So, and I think if I asked you, what are the senior issues, every single person in this room would say, Social Security, Medicare, right? What is that for kids? And the fact of the matter is that it's not just two things, it is all the things that we've been talking about today. So the challenge is greater, but it doesn't make it less important. It matters that we do their education and their child care and early childhood and mental health and domestic, international, and you just go down the list. Even things like child safety seats is a public policy issue. So I think it's a bigger challenge, but I think it's so critical, and to really think about holistic issues of kids and not necessarily all those little segments too. That all of that comes together in an important way. So with that, I really want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Senator Whitehouse's office for hosting this and for their amazing work. Congresswoman Barbara Lee for her amazing legacy, and I wait to see what her next thing is, and all our amazing speakers. Really appreciate all of you for all that you do, but also coming here today and sharing. So if anyone has any questions for them, even after the fact, just let us know, and we will get back to them, and we'll get back to you. So thank you all very much.